Hello everyone, welcome back. Ora here. In today's video we're going to be discussing Destruction Warlock in a PvE setting. So without any further delay, let's get into it. Starting with the Covenants then. Destruction's in a really good place when it comes to its Covenant choices because you have a bit of a spread based on what you're doing and what your intentions are. From a raiding perspective, you have Nightfare, Necrolord, and to some extent you also have access to Kyrian. Kyrian is more if you plan on manipulating add deaths for the additional crit due to Scouring Tithe and the Legendary, Vigilant Garden being a fantastic example of that on Mythic. You can put the dots on an add, it dies, and then you can funnel the boss with the extra crit. So it is huge. Generally speaking though, you're probably looking at Nightfare for raiding, with maybe a little bit of Necrolord for pure single target encounters, because we have access to that execute at this point. Going on to the Mythic Plus side of things though, you have the option of Dreamweaver or Venthia. Venthia takes its place when you start getting into really big pulls, because the Legendary Contained Perpetual Explosion makes it so that your Impending Catastrophe becomes a really strong dot, to the point where it will become your fourth most damaging ability over the course of a dungeon. And that's taking into account you still having your Foresight, your Rain of Fire spams, and just the amount of general raw damage you throw out at that point. So it is worth an honourable mention. But for general go-to day-to-day life, you will probably be running Dreamweaver and Nightfare for pretty much all circumstances. Only if you really want a niche min-max will you probably dabble in your other Covenants. Moving on to the single target talents, without tier and with tier. Without tier, you'll be running Flashover, Reverse Entropy, Dark Pact, Cataclysm, Mortal Coil, Roaring Blaze, and Dark Soul Instability. This build probably won't come as a surprise to any of you that have played in 9.1 with the Sanctum of Domination raid and using the Cinders Legendary. Very much an emphasis on your Incinerate and fire damage, with some situations being where you could also be playing Channel Demon Fire, but your emphasis was on maintaining the Roaring Blaze debuff on a target. The Foresight, on the other hand, changes our single target talent choices rather drastically, because the playstyle becomes inundated with shards in places, and we kind of become a turret at times. The reason for this is because the Blasphemy Infernal, which is spawned on our Foresight when we cast our free Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire, generates more shards with its Immolation Aura, which strengthens things like Rain of Chaos. And Rain of Chaos, for those of you that are new to Warlock, gives you a 15% chance per shard spent to summon an Infernal, while you have the Rain of Chaos buff. The Blasphemy Infernal gives you small periods of Rain of Chaos as a talent, and also your main Infernal itself will give you this. It's not uncommon to have 40 or 50 seconds, and in some cases even higher, of the Rain of Chaos buff. So having the ability to constantly spend shards makes a very strong single target situation, which is why Eradication is chosen over Flashover in the first tier, because once you're generating that many shards, you're able to keep Eradication up for a long period of time. The only tier that I'd say is impacted particularly would be the 30 row, and that is impacted by your Covenant choice. Generally speaking, if you're playing Nightfare, you will be playing Dark Pact rather than Burning Rush, because we have the mobility granted to us by Soul Shape, and it is on a short enough cooldown that in raid fights we don't need Burning Rush. But if you're playing Necrolord, because you have Fleshcraft, you might want to swap off Dark Pact and play Burning Rush instead for the extra mobility in some cases. But for the most part, you'll probably be able to stay with Dark Pact for the extra defensive, and also the fact that you will have Demonic Circle and Gateway to get around a fight space. Moving on to the AoE talents then. The only change is from Cataclysm to Inferno, and this is because Inferno scales really well with much larger pulls because of its ability to allow your Rain of Fire to generate Soul Shard fragments. That Soul Shard fragment generation, paired with your Inferno's Immolation Aura and your Blasphemies, cause this rather powerful feedback loop as demonstrated in the 21 DOS that you're watching currently. This particular synergy also pairs really well with Legendary Wilfrids, and we will discuss that strength once we get to that section. Moving on to gear then. Much like Demonology, which you can go see that guide if you want, the gear is very much the same. We're quite fortunate in that from a rating perspective, a lot of our gear comes from the final 3 bosses. Jailer, Rigel and Lords of Dread. This means that we can get a naturally higher item level on a lot of stuff, and with the Creation Catalyst becoming a thing and being released a week after this video, it means that you're going to be able to convert things like the gloves, for instance, the Bindings of the Banished One, from the Jailer into a tier piece for a higher item level. You could use the tier piece from Lihavum, but again, the gloves from the Jailer are going to be a higher item level, and this kind of boils down to when we start discussing things like our stats and what we're after going forward. Because if you look to Wowhead, the guide for gear there actually shows us using the tier gloves, which is ideal because for the Legendaries, one of our Legendaries suffers from a problem where it can only be crafted on head or hands, but we will discuss that momentarily. For the dungeon gear though, again, it's pretty much a lot of the stuff that we've seen so far through the expansion, in that you'll want the helm from Plaguefall, the neck from Halls of Atonement, and kind of want to play with your stats in general. I've deliberately left the trinkets off this list because the trinkets are very deterministic in that how you want to play. For instance, IQD from the other side is our best single target trinket on Sims because it's a 3-minute trinket. This is very much, if you're not playing with Wilfrids, you have your 3-minute Inferno, you are going for a huge amount of burst when you have your Inferno, which is what makes that particular trinket so strong. Alternatively though, if you are running Wilfrids and you're running dungeons for instance, you might want to run double passives, so you might be running your Changeling and a Solaria's Secret Technique, or you might be wanting to play with Soul Letting Ruby because you want that level of crit going forward, and because of Wilfrids you are being able to get a 2-minute Inferno or 1-minute Inferno, and your damage profile will be reflected in these trinkets, so it's very much how you want to play. A personal recommendation would be if you can get a IQD, if you can get a Soul Letting Ruby, and if you can get an Unbound Changeling, along with the Solaria's Technique, you are going to be covered for any and all situations. If you can't, however, get your hands on an IQD, you can use the raid trinkets in the Sigil of the First Ones, bearing in mind that is essentially a 5-minute version of an IQD, in that it will only grant you versatility, which is huge. It's a substantial amount of versatility. It's about 1,000 and something, I believe, at heroic difficulty, 1,048, I believe, off the top of my head. Or you can also use Elegy of the First Ones, which again drops from Prototype Pantheon, so there's a really good boss there in that you can get 2 types of trinkets. But again, trinkets are very much a personal preference thing, which is why they're not on this list. The rest though is considered your quote-unquote BIS in most cases, and gear is a not one size fits all. It's a very personal thing. Like for instance, I don't have the staff, the Nathrian Further from Halls of Atonement. I actually have the one that drops off the Mana Storms instead, which kind of moved some of my gear stat weights around. But all in all, the 2 pictures that you've seen through this video will kind of set you up in a good spot for gear. Finally, onto the Legendaries then. As you can see, there's 3 on the screen, and these are your kind of main Legendaries that you'll be playing around with at various points. There is a 4th one that I will briefly mention, but we'll start with the ones that are on the screen currently. So you have the Cinders and the Madness of the Ajakir. Funnily enough, these are literally chop and change depending on how many tier pieces you have. If you don't have any tier yet at all, you will be running Cinders, and this is because you'll be running the Roaring Blaze build, and Conflagrate having an increased or an additional charge and a reduced recharge time is very synergistic with that build. However, the moment you go into having your 4 set and you're playing Eradication and you're being a bit more of a shard spending turret, then Madness becomes a lot better for you because you are getting a lot more Chaos Bolts out, and its buff essentially acts like a form of Backdraft in that it reduces the cast time of your Chaos Bolt. The buff maintenance, however, you prioritize getting your Eradication uptime and making sure that that doesn't fall off over your Madness, because there will be periods where you do not double cast your Chaos Bolt to benefit from it. You then obviously have Wilfrid's, which is your AoE cleave legendary of choice, and the strength of Wilfrid's paired with Inferno, Soul Conduit, Reign of Chaos is, as kind of demonstrated in the previous clip of the DOS that I did, I actually ended up with a sub-minute Infernal at the end of that pack, and at the start of Ardenweald itself, we had a large pull, I popped Inferno, and my Infernal went from being a 3-minute cooldown to a 1 minute 5 second cooldown, to the point where we did one large pull at the start of the Ardenweald section, and then immediately went into the clip that you saw, where it was just coming off cooldown, I hit Earn, and then just went to town again. And this is kind of the strength of Wilfrid's. It means that you can, in much larger pulls like Halls of Atonement, or the Ardenweald section within DOS, you can literally line up your 3-minute cooldown with 1-minute trinkets, which is insane, and why during the gear section I discussed that you could run 2 passive trinkets, because at that point you're not really focusing on using on use, you just want the stats because you will constantly be benefiting from it. But if you're not using Wilfrid's and you're using Madness, or the honourable mention being the Embers of Diabolic Raiment, you can line it Infernal up with trinkets much better. Embers of Diabolic Raiment allow you to spend and generate more shards because it increases your shard generation by Incinerate by 100%. This does mean that your Fire and Brimstone talent could see a lot more use in periods where you're not having such large pulls that Inferno becomes a contender, because you're actually focusing on cleaving, say, 7 or 8 targets. But again, that is a lot more suboptimal when you start getting to the higher keys, which is kind of why I'm staying away from it in this guide. If you guys do want to see it in action, let me know and I will discuss it in a later video.